Okay, so I've kind of kept working on the block out, trying to get it to feel a little bit more interesting. I decided to get rid of a couple more of the stairs and then just made the architecture extend out a little bit further. Just felt like that made it feel a little bit more inviting and a little bit more interesting composition wise. From most camera angles, we kind of get most lines facing towards the gate right now, which I kind of like. So if we look at most of these, where the boat is kind of facing towards the gate, all of this architecture is all facing towards it. So it really kind of pulls the eye towards this center area. Even this rock is kind of pointing towards that. So I kind of try to really frame that nicely so that it really pulls your attention right away. Um, and then I started to think of some other camera shots. So I kind of like where this was going, where you kind of get some really close up rock that we can potentially use some depth of field on or something to blur that out a little bit and get some nice composition where you kind of get both the boat and the entrance all nicely composed together. Not sure if I'm completely happy with some of the tree placement, but that's something that will likely quite drastically change once we get final tree models. So I'm not going to worry too much about that yet. So yeah, all of this is still one FBX, so that's something that we will start splitting apart right about now. But yeah, overall, pretty happy with the stage of the block out now. It's a whole bunch of Megascan stuff now that I replaced the original stuff of, just to get something a little more representational of the final result. Um, Even some little plans and stuff. I didn't want to go too crazy with the details, but also kind of get a feel for stuff that I might end up using and populating the scene with. So it's kind of nice to get an early feel for it, as well as a placeholder water material. I didn't make this from scratch myself. I just kind of grabbed something from the marketplace for now, but I will replace that later for something completely handmade. I think this was from like the Australia pack, and then I just tuned it a little bit to be blue instead of brownish and stuff. But we'll get to it later. It's not really something worth worrying about just yet. It's just something I took a stab at early on. Cool. So what I'll do is we'll jump back into Maya. And as you can see here, it's still just all separate objects in Maya. And then this is all combined and exported in FBX. So what I'm going to want to start doing is bringing all of these into Unreal as individual assets. So currently, it is just, if we want to select a boat, we can't really do that. We're selecting this entire block out, except for all the Megascan stuff. So that's obviously not ideal once we want to actually properly start working on the scene. So now that I'm happy with the block out, it's a good point to kind of start splitting it off. So what I'll do is I'll grab this boat, which currently unfortunately does have frozen transformation, so it might be slightly hard to get it perfectly aligned with the grid again, but I'm going to make a duplicate of this, so I'll just keep the original block out intact for now. I'm just gonna click Shift P to take it out of the group. I'm just gonna name it already. It's nice to have these all named so that when you export the FBX, if somebody else brings it into Maya, it will have a proper name to it. It's always nice so it's not all a whole bunch of clutter and random names. And what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to bring this to the origin. So I'm going to go 0, 0, 0. Because in Unreal, once we export our object, the pivot will always be where the origin of your file is. So this is where the pivot will be, which means we obviously do not want to export it while the boat is down here. We want the boat to be somewhat aligned on here, so that when we place it in Unreal Engine, it will automatically kind of sit at the right height and with the right rotation. So I'm just going to set my pivot maybe to this bottom part of the boat by holding D and V again. Then I'm going to hold X and middle click to snap into place here. Now, hopefully this angle is snap rotated. I'm not sure if it is, but I'm just going to try and hold J and rotate it. Hope it lines up, and unfortunately it does not. In Maya, it can be somewhat tricky to align something to the grid again perfectly. There is kind of a strange trick or workaround I like to use when I end up in these situations where I just can't perfectly rotate it. There's a couple different tricks you can use, but one that I oftentimes end up using is I make a cube, which by default is obviously aligned to the grid nicely. And in this case, luckily our object does have a flat surface, so that makes our life a lot easier. Because basically what we can do is we can tell Maya to snap this flat surface to this flat surface, and that way it'll be realigned to the grid again. So to do so, we're going to go into, I believe it's Modify, Snap Together tool. Then we're going to select this face here, and it'll show this little arrow. Then we're going to select the cube. I'll show this little line of, okay, we'll snap this to that. Then we hit enter, and boom. It's aligned to the cube, and now it's realigned to the grid perfectly. It's a bit of a hacky workaround, but it works. So that's something I tend to do when I do lose my alignment. That way I know it's perfect and I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm not entirely sure how high I want this to be. Based on this, actually, I'm going to want this to be touching the water, of course. I want to be able to just drag and drop this in Unreal and have it just sit on the water perfectly. As you can see as well, I did make the boat a little bit more detailed compared to my original block out. So that way when I hand it off to the artist that will make the final prop, he'll have a clear idea of the proportions and this kind of overall shape of this boat. Because the original is just not quite in line with the actual canoe shape, so this is a lot closer. Cool, so something like that will probably do the trick. So I'm gonna just select that and export it. And so this is not gonna be a blockout asset anymore. This will actually be like a final asset essentially. Even though it's a work in progress, we're gonna want to set it in a proper folder so that later on when we do make the final asset, we can just re-import it and the final asset will pop in. So first off, let's make sure our folder structure is in place for that, which currently it is not. We got our block out, we got levels. I want a geometry folder, or you could call it meshes or whatever, it doesn't really matter. And again, I'm going to mirror that folder structure in my source folder structure. So in here, I'm just gonna make a geometry folder as well. And I'm just going to call this boat 01. Again, I like to have it numbered so that if we were to make a second variation of a boat or whatever, we can always make a boat 02, 03, and so on. In this case, it's not too descriptive. If you have a lot of assets in your scene or in your project, you might want it to be a little bit more descriptive. But in this case, since we know we won't have too many boats, we'll probably just have this single one. Just boat should be okay. Now export selected. Actually, just to be safe, it does look like my object has some transforms, so I'm going to also freeze transforms just in case some of that might transfer over, and export again. Cool, so now in Unreal Engine, I'm going to import, and let me double check where this folder was. I'm just going to copy the path to that folder. In Unreal Engine, I paste that path. Actually, that would have been really easy to find because we do have a consistent folder structure, but going to import that. It should remember the settings from last time, so it does have combined meshes turned on and stuff, so we can just go import all. And boom, we've got a boat. So now we drag and drop it. I believe, I guess, yeah, it doesn't snap to water by default. But at least if we just snap it onto ground nearby, we can kind of have it align nicely. So there we go. Now we don't need it in our original blockout anymore. So usually what I find myself doing is I kind of align this somewhat. Don't know if I care about it being too perfect. I might as well just kind of line it up because I do like the original positioning. So I'll just kind of line that up nicely. Something like that, maybe a little bit higher. Also, it does a grid snapping right now. Maybe we don't want that for the boat. Be a little bit more flexible. And then we can just get rid of it in our original blockout. So back into Maya, if we look at the blockout, I'm gonna hide the boat so I don't accidentally do stuff with that. We can just delete the boat from the blockout. For this specific export, I am combining because I was having some errors from like different transforms and stuff. So I will combine the entire blockout before exporting. And I'm going to export blockout. And blockout 03 is the one I was set, so I'm going to replace that. So now back in Unreal Engine, our original blockout file that had the boat in there. As you can see, if we double click this, it has the boat. I'm going to re-import. Just click and re-import this mesh here, and we should see the boat disappear. once it's done loading. It's doing something right now. Not sure. Okay, there we go. Boat is gone. And there we go. So now all we have is this little boat. So now we have the freedom to move that around in Unreal Engine. Practically, we could have probably split this off earlier if we wanted to. In my case, I just kept it around just because I have most things in Maya still, but if you are certain you need a certain prop no matter what, you could just export it off earlier, like a statue. We know we guaranteed need the statue, so I could have practically already split that off into an individual object. But in this case, I just kind of kept it all in a Maya file first to really figure out what I wanted. Because as you can see, the temple structures did change a fair bit from last time we looked at it. So if I did split things off earlier, maybe things would have changed a bunch, whereas now I'm pretty certain I want these shapes. That makes it a little bit easier to decide what FBXs I actually end up needing. Also, what I kind of like doing is we could, like we've done before, just drag and drop materials into our scene. Ideally though, especially later down the line, you want to assign your materials to the actual static mesh. So if we double click the boat, we can actually assign our material in here. So we're just gonna assign a block out material for now. Later on we will make an actual boat material once the final asset gets made. So I'll apply that, hit save, so that now whenever someone drags this boat into the scene, it will have that material applied to it. So that way you don't always have just the original basic Unreal material. Sure, I'm gonna save that. I don't think I changed much, but just to be safe. Nice, I'll have it all be saved. Perfect, so we're gonna basically do that for all objects here. So say let me just undo this combine. Undo. So it's just one static mesh right now. There we go. Okay, so like I basically want this whole thing to probably be one static mesh for now. Maybe we'll split it off into more later. But I think because it's somewhat unique with where we want the trims to be, where we want the walls to be, I'm just gonna make it one big FBX for now. So I'm just gonna duplicate this, click Shift P again, and I'm going to call this like Temple Entrance 01. Basically anything that's part of this set of the temple, like all the trims and all the objects that are part of this structure, I'll just call temple underscore something so that in Unreal Engine, they'll all show up next to one another. Based on a naming convention. So this one already has a pivot in a perfect place, which is convenient. So I'm just gonna set this to 0, 0, 0 again. Oops, hit enter on that. Isolate. Okay. So in this case, I probably do want the pivot to be here for easy placement in the scene since it's somewhat centered. In some cases, if you want to build more modular walls, you might want it to be somewhere like on the bottom left corner or something, so that in Unreal Engine when you snap to the grid you would build walls this way. So if we did actual modular walls, we would probably want it there, but because I know for this specific scene it is somewhat of a unique entrance, I'm just going to keep it in the center so that it's nice and easy to place and it will just be like a nice and centered object. And even this you could practically still grid snap quite nicely because the metrics do line up. It's just more annoying when you need to rotate and stuff. That's where the corner stuff comes in handier, because if we rotate this by 90 degrees, at least it still somewhat lines up. Still may not be ideal, so I haven't really planned for corners, but yeah, you get the idea. Cool, so in this case, pivot right there is fine to me. I'm gonna delete history just in case by pressing Alt-Shift-D, going to modify freeze transformations again, and then we're going to just export this one as well. Again, not a block out. This will be a final asset in the end. So I'm just going to call this Temple Entrance 01. Export. Import. Perfect. And there we go. So we're just going to kind of place that nicely. So now let's go 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to grid snap. Maybe about 50 centimeter increments. There we go. That kind of lights up. Maybe I'll do 10 centimeter increments. It looks like I did nudge it a little bit. There we go. It all lines up perfectly. So now if we go back into Maya, we can do the same thing. Go to original blockout, delete this whole entrance. Again, I'm just going to combine and export for the blockout. So blockout 3. And we're basically going to do that for every single object we need. Nothing too crazy here. Also, that's a useful shortcut as well. If you select something in your scene and you want to find it in your content browser, you can either click this little button here, and it'll browse to where it lives, or you can also press Ctrl B on the keyboard and it'll take you to where that lives. So if I want to find out where this one lives, it takes me right to it. If I want to find out where the blockout lives, I just press Ctrl B and it takes me right to it. And I'm just going to re-import that again. Take a quick second because it will build our nano geometry and stuff again. And there we go. So now there's no entrance here anymore except for the one we made as a separate object. And I'm going to do the same thing, open it up, apply our blockout material, save, done. Later on, this will probably have a separate trim material and brick material, but we'll get to that once we actually make the final art. But yeah, so we're basically going to go through and, oh, whoops, I made a mistake. I exported it with the boat again, but I'll make sure that's deleted next time. I think I undo it one too many times there. But it's okay, we can delete it again and bring it back. So I'm basically going to go through and do that with every single object that I know I'll need. So I'll have the 3 vases, this longer one, this one with a different shape, and the short stubby one. I'll make these stairs as separate objects. I'll make these corner pieces as separate objects that can be placed individually. And yeah, that should get us to a pretty good place. So I'm gonna do all of that and then I'll jump back in. All right, so as you can see here, I've rebuilt the scene with all of these being separate assets now, which is awesome because now we can just freely move things around in Unreal Engine. Like we know we needed this tree, so now we can just use this tree however we want to. And they're all nicely instanced, which is a huge benefit. Like some of these trims, for instance, I export as separate trims. And these are all modular, right? So if we grid snap that, it means like these are made to like snap together really nicely. So if we set this to like 100 centimeters, for instance, all of that just snaps perfectly. This is something you'll see a lot for more architectural structures. It's like most games will have very modular buildings where they're usually made of like 4-meter chunks or something, where I've kind of done it for the walls as well. So these walls are like basically 4-meter kind of cubes that just snap together perfectly. Mostly this will be replaced for better art later, but for kind of the early proxy version of it, this works perfectly where we just kind of have the base shapes. We can start building our scene with it, and then once we get the final art, all of that will just still snap together nicely. And the really nice thing with all of these being placed in Avatar like this now is that if we want to update one of these in Maya, all of these have FBXs, right? So we can go open source location and we'll find all of our FBXs here, all nicely named. So in Maya, if we wanted to just grab one of those FBXs and change it, so if we want to grab our, say our trim, I think I saw a little error on there, so I might want to fix that real quick. Press F. So here's our trim. You can see the pivot is snapped. So the pivot is right here, basically in Unreal Engine, which means that when it gets snapped around, it snaps together nicely. It might benefit from having a pivot back here in front of here, but I think this will probably do okay for now. The one thing I want to make sure is that when these are snapped together, that basically all of this aligns perfectly, right? Which I think they actually do right now. Basically, the way to do that is if I select all these vertices and I hold D and X to snap our pivot to the grid again, I can press R and just squish this way down to make sure it's completely flat, which I'm pretty sure I've done for this specific trim already. But that way you can make sure that now this snaps perfectly on this 4-meter grid without any issues. So we can just perfectly snap all of that. But the nice thing is, if I want to change a proxy now, say let's change the boat, for instance. If I want to slightly change the block out there, we can just drag that in. And let's say we want this tip to also be on the back. I'm just going to go edit mesh and duplicate this section. So it should be under face duplicate. I'm going to go object mode and deselect the boat. Cool. So I'm just going to rotate this by 180 degrees. And put this on the back, just somewhere around there for now. So now if we grab this and we export it as our boat, export selected. Say if we have multiple of these placed, right? Like even if we have one here or wherever. Now if we re-import a boat, all of those will update. So all of these have that on the back now. So that's kind of why we work this way. So now if any of these assets get finalized, we can literally re-import it, apply the final material to the mesh. So once they're nicely textured and stuff, we'll just apply the final material to it as well. And then basically every single boat in the scene will look like the final version. So that's a really nice way to prepare your scene for success later. So you have all of that nicely figured out already. So now it's just a matter of making the actual final art. And that's what we'll go over in all of these next videos, making a proper tree, making the boat, making the vases and stuff, as well as making trims. So all of that will get covered nicely. Sweet, so that puts our block out in a really good spot. But that's the exact reason why we actually want to use the material assignment within this object, because if it's placed in a scene and it has a different material applied to it, like say that this material applied to it, and later on we, want to actually tell this to be a completely different material. So if I want the boat to be like blue, for instance, so I'm going to duplicate this one again as well. So these two have just a basic material with no overrides. This one has its own override in the level. So if I make a blue material real quick, let's go red to make it really clear. And I apply that red material to boat now. What we'll see is these will automatically update. Whereas because this one has a material override applied in a level, will not get the updated material from the static mesh. That's why it's ideal to plug things into your actual static mesh rather than applying material overrides in the level. We can easily remove this override. We just scroll down here to material. You can click this arrow here, and that will reset it to the default, which is the red material at the moment. Naming convention is a little confusing here, but yes, now we make this white again. All of these will switch to this material. So that's a really good habit, preparing your static meshes, having the material plugged in there, and then placing that in your scene so that later on when we make the final version, it's a matter of just re-importing the asset, applying your material, and it'll look finalized in your scene. So there we go. I'm going to go hit save all. So this is usually where I want to be at the end of my block out and reference gathering stage, just having a very clear idea on what assets I need and what I need to look like. By that I mean, of course, having clear reference and just a close enough proxy to kind of know what a shape is. So this will make it easy to either let myself know when I start on the asset on what I should be doing, or in our case, working with a team, sharing with my team what it should look like. So in this case, for instance, with the boat, this asset will be created by our artist, Dylan, who will also be making videos on how to approach that. So we will basically get this proxy from me and look at a reference I've gathered, and also, we have iterated together on finding reference and stuff just to make sure we're aligned on the overall vision of this boat, as well as checking with Clinton Crumpler if he likes the overall direction and stuff, because he is the art director of the project. So in the end, the art director usually has a final say on what art should look like. So if he has a very specific idea of what he wants something to look like, then that's what we should strive for to try to hit. And then me as a lead, I would try and kind of communicate with my team as well, and make sure that I give feedback both artistically and technically that kind of aligns with that vision. So yeah, for the boat, that should be nice and clear for Dylan to start working on. And that's kind of what we want to be for every single asset. So, the statues with clear reference for on our ref board, and basically everything we have here, there's clear reference and clear proxies now. So that kind of marks a good ending point for our blockout and reference getter interface. So the next step I usually take if I was working on a scene like this as an individual is thinking of which parts fill up the most of my scene, basically which assets and materials will be used the most. So in a lot of cases, the landscape would be the obvious one. So that's why I usually like tackling something like that first, is because it fills up a lot of my project. So if I get at least a first pass done on that, I can get a better sense of what everything feels like together and make sure I make a nice and cohesive image. So usually, landscape for an exterior scene, or maybe architecture like brick walls or plaster walls or something. Heavily depends on your scene, of course, but it's kind of looking around and seeing which assets get used the most and which materials will get used the most. That's where I usually like to start personally, always going from large to small, of course. So you don't want to just jump straight into some small props because you're not really going to get all that much out of it for your scene. So large to small is always a good thing, a good way to approach things. But yeah, in this case, I am working with a team, of course. So as I mentioned, Dylan will work on a boat. I'll kind of have people working on things simultaneously. So in the meantime, Rogelia will be working on the trims and walls textures and stuff. Kat will be working on the trees. Both of those will have videos as well, by the way. And then Clinton will be working on the vases, also with videos. And then there's a couple of other assets that we'll actually have some Decagon team members working on, such as statues and some additional small props and stuff we might add later down the line.